All right, welcome back, and we are going to be talking about a new subject here. It is ethical and regulatory contexts. Mainly we're talking about ethics and the regulation of advertising. Now, I have mentioned that we would be bringing in a new book, an additional book, and we're doing it with this outline. The book is Advertising Age, The Principles of Advertising and Marketing Communication at Work by Thorson and Duffy. Cengage Publishing. I believe you can find a used copy of this for not very much. And so we're going to be using this book quite a bit as we go forward. It's published by the advertising journal Advertising Age. So it comes from a very good place of expertise. Advertising Age, maybe the best known publication related to advertising. So Advertising Age, The Principles of Advertising and Marketing Communication at Work. So we're looking at ethics and we're looking at regulation. There's a statement at the beginning of this chapter: advertising is inherently controversial. And I think that is fairly obvious. We all have strong feelings about advertising one way or the other. Part of the reason for this is that advertising has developed hand in hand with a consumer culture. I think we talked about this at one point, that at the early part of the 20th century in particular, as technology ramped up, more goods and services were produced, and advertising went along with that. Advertising grew a tremendous amount during that time. Not that there had not been advertising prior to that. Criticisms of advertising have been that it promotes materialism, and materialism is focusing too much on things, belongings, things that you might want not out of necessity but for status purposes. Promotion of dangerous products and behavior, and probably the first thing you think there is cigarettes, but also, for that matter, could be alcohol, could be products that cause someone to lose their ability to drive safely, and so on. Targeting of vulnerable children, a lot of criticism of advertising for targeting kids. Stereotyping is something else that we will talk about, and all of these are common criticisms of advertising. And again, we're going to be talking about ethics and regulation here in connection with all of this. Two ways of lessening the impact of the negative aspects of advertising. One is a focus on ethics and understanding of ethics and acceptance of ethics. The other is regulation. Advertising professional organizations promote ethical behavior. A couple of examples are the National Advertising Review Board and the Institute for Advertising Ethics. These are organizations, professional organizations that establish standards of ethics and then hold people within advertising accountable to those ethics. Then there is governmental regulation. We have the Federal Trade Commission. And I think early on we talked about the FTC and its ability to rein in false or misleading advertising, penalize advertisers for such ads. Also, local and state agencies get involved in advertising. For example, the placement of retail signs and billboards within cities can be regulated by city councils. Uninvited phone calls have been attempted to be regulated at the state level for some time. Here's a video on the Federal Trade Commission. We may have seen this in an early commentary, an early outline, but let's look at it again.
This is you. You've been ripped off. Or you've spotted a scam. Don't keep it to yourself. Take it to the Federal Trade Commission by filing a complaint. What kind of complaint? The Federal Trade Commission is the nation's consumer protection agency. So if a business doesn't deliver on its promises, or if someone cheats you out of your money, the Federal Trade Commission wants to hear about it.
I bought a phone card with 350 minutes of calling time, but it cut me off after 20.
I'm getting bills for things I didn't buy.
I think someone stole my identity.
Letter said I won a sweepstakes, but I had to wire money to cover the taxes. I did, and never heard from them again.
I responded to an ad online for a free trial offer, but then I started seeing charges for it every month.
I thought the email was from someone who saw my resume and wanted to hire me, but they asked for my bank account number. I reported it to the Federal Trade Commission.
Telling the Federal Trade Commission helps us stop rip-offs, scams, and fraudsters. Your complaints matter here. To file a complaint, just go to ftc.gov/complaint. Click on the link to the Federal Trade Commission Complaint Assistant and answer the questions. Or call 1-877-FTC-HELP. That's all there is to it.
Now, that is not the one that we saw before, so I guess that's good. The one that we looked at maybe in the first outline is there as the second link. Has a little bit more directly to do with advertising, but the Federal Trade Commission does oversee advertising and will police and will fine companies for what it considers to be false and misleading advertising. So go ahead and have a look at that second video. Also, I think that would be worthwhile and would be useful too. Ethics are important because advertising is most effective when it is considered trustworthy and believable by its audience. So if the advertising is to the extent that the advertising is not considered trustworthy and believable, then the advertising loses effectiveness. So from that standpoint, ethics are a practical matter. Ethical and regulatory problems, some of the things that come up from time to time, things that are in questionable taste. Now, this gets complicated because changing societal norms make issues of taste much more complicated. What is in questionable taste to me may not be in questionable taste to you. Certainly things have changed over the past couple of generations as to what is considered tasteful or not. The Federal Communication Commission, the FCC, still bans profanity on broadcast TV and radio except for the overnight hours, middle of the night. There's what's called a safe harbor for profanity and what have you. But that does not include cable and internet communications. That's only broadcast over-the-air TV and radio. And so it can be quite confusing depending on whether you're watching broadcast TV or whether you're watching something that is only on cable or only on the internet, only streaming. Advertisers then are increasingly less fearful of backlash in the form of boycotts and so forth. We're looking at a media landscape where things are very, very much in a niche mode. In other words, nothing except maybe the Super Bowl has really super broad viewership, an audience that includes all different demographic groups. Things are very targeted. And so, what offends one group does not offend another group. So advertisers are less concerned about some of these issues of taste than they once were. Edgy programming gets produced even on broadcast TV, which may not appeal to everyone, but still can attract sizable audiences that are large enough within a desired demographic group. So all of these questions of questionable taste much more difficult to address than they were maybe 25, 50 years ago. Even so, does this absolve advertisers of responsibility to a larger society? Should there still, in spite of what we've just said, still be concerns for what is in questionable taste? And it depends on the circumstance. Advertisers are still quick to end association with celebrities who run afoul of whatever the modern societal norms are. And so what you get in trouble for today is for saying is not necessarily what you would have been in trouble for saying or doing 25 years ago, or certainly 50 years ago. But this is still something that is a concern. I showed you early on one of the ads featuring Brooke Shields when she was still very much a teenager for whatever brand of jeans it was, very sexually suggestive ad, and this was very, very controversial and in questionable taste in the 80s. I think it still would be today, but I might be wrong. So things do change as time goes by. The stereotyping of women and others. And the definition of stereotyping, I think most of you are familiar with that term, but not necessarily. So stereotyping is a standardized mental picture that is widely held and that represents an oversimplified opinion, a prejudiced attitude, or uncritical judgment, especially as it relates to one particular group of people. Is advertising directed to women overly focused on beauty and fashion? Does it emphasize too much cleaning and cooking? Now, I really think that advertising has gone a long way in the direction of eliminating some of those stereotypes. As it says there in parentheses, today it is common to see men in homemaking roles. It's not at all uncommon to see men doing the cooking or the cleaning or what have you in commercials today, men doing the laundry. So I think a lot of that has changed in pretty recent years. There's also stereotyping of gender, age, and race. Now I would ask, do you see more inclusiveness in television commercials in recent years? I do. I see representations of groups and individuals that we wouldn't have seen a few years ago. So I think advertising is making some strides in this particular way. Does stereotyping damage individuals' belief in what they can do, what they themselves can do? Does it limit their expectation of themselves? Does it limit their life choices? Here's a little video on stereotyping. I'm just going to show you the first minute or so.
A new parenting alert, raising concerns about how what your children watch affects the way they think and feel about gender. And Mara is here with the details. And you spent some time with some families, Mara?
I did, yeah. A group of parents and kids who spoke really candidly about the gender stereotypes they're seeing. This new survey finds parents say those images shape what their kids think it means to be a boy or a girl. Everything from how they look and talk, even to the kinds of jobs they aspire to. From their favorite TV shows,
The Queen,
to big screen blockbusters. TV shows and movies are a big part of our kids' lives. But just how is all of this screen time affecting how boys and girls see themselves? This morning, an eye-opening new survey shedding light on how stereotypes in movies and on TV impact the way kids think about gender, sexuality, and diversity.
So we'll stop that there, and so far this is not specifically about advertising, but advertising certainly figures into that mix, and the idea of stereotyping is the same whether we're discussing advertising or television programs or movies or what have you. Political attack advertising, negative political advertising, may increase the likelihood that citizens will not vote, and or it may cause them to become cynical about their own government. So there's been a lot of criticism of negative advertising, negative political advertising, or political attack advertising. Now, political advertising is protected by the First Amendment. The First Amendment primarily exists to protect political speech, and political advertising obviously very much is political speech. So it is difficult to regulate because it does fall under the First Amendment. I'm going to show you here a video that, and you may enjoy watching the whole video. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but it looks at some of the political attack advertising over the years.
Eisenhower answers America.
The Democrats have made mistakes, but aren't their intentions good?
Well, if the driver of your school bus runs into a truck, hits a lamppost, drives into a ditch, you don't say his intentions are good. You get a new bus driver.
Step right up, folks. See the mental marvel of the campaign, Mr. McGOP. He promises to solve all your problems. Ask him any question.
what about Korea?
We don't belong.
Conference, President Eisenhower said, At the same press conference, President Eisenhower said,
"No one can make a decision except me."
And as for any major ideas from Mr. Nixon,
"If you give me a week, I might think of one. I don't remember."
President Eisenhower could not remember, but the voters will remember. For real leadership in the 60s, help elect Senator John F. Kennedy president.
8, 9,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Okay, I'm going to pause that. At that point, a couple of those ads, that last one you saw is called the Daisy spot. And Barry Goldwater was the candidate who was running against President Johnson in 1964. And Goldwater is never mentioned in that spot. But Goldwater, his image was one of someone who was warlike. And so they did that ad planting the image in people's mind of a nuclear war, nuclear bomb exploding. And it's a very effective ad. In the previous ad, when President Eisenhower was about to leave office and the vice president was Richard Nixon, and he was running against John F. Kennedy, this was really damaging to Nixon. That in a news conference they asked, well, what kind of decisions has Vice President Nixon made? And Eisenhower says, well, I make all the decisions. And then someone said, can you give us an example of an important decision that Richard Nixon has made, or an idea that he had? And Eisenhower says, well, if you give me a week, I might be able to think of one. Wow. And so that ends up in a John F. Kennedy ad. And really, who could blame the Kennedy campaign for creating an ad from that? So political advertising can be very, very bitter and negative, and can turn off voters, but it is part of our freedom of speech. And again, First Amendment is first and foremost there to protect freedom of political speech. So we will continue with this discussion on advertising ethics and regulation next time, and we'll see you then.